is Suzanne Herrera-McCullough.
And I'm Robert L. McCullough. Suzanne and I are both longstanding WGA members with a couple hundred produced credits. And every one of those scripts needed what I like to call a hot log line to sell it.
Which is what we're going to talk today about.
But before we begin, maybe a little background about what led us to create the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards and the Wiki Screenplay Contest.
A little more than 5 or 6 years ago, a family member who was an aspiring screenplay writer, actually we have a few in the family, came to us and said that he had entered a screenplay contest and wanted to know what we thought of them. And we really had actually we had heard of them, but we didn't really know what they were about. So we decided to do some research, and he also showed us his reviews on his screenplay, and we soon realized that it didn't seem like a lot of the readers really knew what they were talking about. So we decided to do some research, and we love teaching people and sharing our knowledge because we've been in the business for so long. And we decided to do 2 screenplay contests, the Wiki and the Santa Barbara.
Right. And after working with thousands of writers at each of those contests, it became apparent to us that there's been a lot of what I'd call stale information and guidance about the craft and business of screenwriting, which is why I've now written a series of books to help writers avoid the frustrations faced by so many screenwriters. Stop Screwing Around and Format Your Screenplay Like a Pro was one of my more popular books. It's been a big seller because it easily solves the #1 challenge faced by so many beginning writers: poor script formatting. This little book, it's the no-nonsense, straightforward bottom line about what it takes to professionally format your scripts.
And I also like your newest book.
Oh, okay. Right. This is The Hollywood Screenwriter. And like it says on the cover, it's really an insider's guide to professional screenwriting. Well, I just hope it helps everybody understand that screenwriting can actually be a great career if you go about it in the right way. Anyway, all my books are available on Amazon, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, before we begin today, look for the little Q&A or chat icons at the bottom of your screen where you can ask any questions as we go along. We'll try to get them. Try to get to them when we're done here.
We're going to go pretty quickly today. So we're going to start by assuming that you've either had written a treatment or an outline, or you want to, or you might even have a pretty good script in your hands.
Right. And writing a great script is one thing, but selling it is quite another. In the process of getting a movie made, your screenplay is really just step #1. The fact is, once you get a script past the level of the bottom line gatekeepers, few people will actually devote the time to read your entire script.
That's one of the reasons we started the Wiki Screenplay Contest, is to help writers break through those gatekeepers by writing the first 10 pages of their screenplays with an undeniable hook that captures the reader's attention and doesn't let go.
Right. When you're the writer, you're going to have the opportunity to tell all sorts of people about your stories, whether it's your family members, close friends, people in your writing class, the checker at the grocery store, or some Hollywood big shot. The question will always be the same: what are you working on?
That's your cue. You need to be ready with a quick response that always leaves them wanting more. The response is your log line, and you need to be ready with it at all times.
So when somebody asks you, what are you working on, or what's your story about, that doesn't mean they want you to tell them the whole story, scene by scene. Trust me on this. Nobody wants to hear your whole story. What they want to hear is the setup or the premise in as few words as possible.
How important it is to have, how important is it to have a log line? Well, it's very important. It's actually almost as important as your script itself, because a bad log line will have industry readers setting your script aside without even reading it. There are a lot of scripts floating around, many written by really good writers. That's why you have to give the reader every reason to commit an hour or more of their time to your script, and no reasons to avoid it.
Right. And if you want to get an agent or a manager to work with you, the first thing they're going to do is ask you to send them some log lines and a script as a writing sample.
Keep in mind the fact that they already have a stack of scripts, probably about this high, and you're competing with every one of them.
That means your log lines you need to quickly draw them in You need to have a unique concept with intriguing characters who deal with compelling challenges.
A log line is simple, but it can get pretty tricky and complicated at its core. A log line is a very brief summary, one, two, or three sentences at the most. That establishes the genre, the setting, the protagonist, and the primary conflict that leaves the reader or listener wanting to know more.
Look, when we're doing log lines, when we're writing a log line or even pitching our stuff, we tend to give too many details, to over explain everything, which can be a big mistake. At its essence, your log line needs to be concise with a clear hook for the reader or the person you're telling it to. Your whole objective should be for the reader or listener to say, tell me more.
I think that's what might be scaring some writers. After all, most writers are just writers, not the most talkative, maybe, not the sales type, not always the best at being the center of attention.
We write a great script and then we think our work should speak for itself. But the fact is, you're going to need a good elevator pitch.
If you can just come up with a 20-second elevator pitch log line that conveys the essentials of your script, you'll get a lot more attention than the writer who tries to sell the whole story, or who takes the opposite approach and tries to sum up their entire screenplay with something like it's Barbie meets everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah, and we've heard those crazy juxtapositions of titles as a way to sell, and it really doesn't really work. The tendency is to just ask people to read your script so they can see how terrific it is, but that's actually a pretty big deal. Getting somebody to read your whole script when all they really want to know is, what is it about?
And that's the log line, what your script is about. But we're not talking about explaining the whole story, just the essential elements.
There are three main things that you need to have in a good log line. First, you need to clearly identify your protagonist, the character who has something at stake, who has the most to win or lose.
This is the character we care about, the one who drives the story forward. Second, you need to tell us specifically what the protagonist needs to accomplish, a primary goal or a need that makes him or her do something extraordinary.
It's not just a question of them wanting something like enough money to pay their bills. It's the need, for example, to rob a bank that can drive a story forward. And then third, what's at stake? What is the protagonist risking by robbing a bank? Is it just the fear of getting caught? Or is it the fear of maybe losing custody of a child in a paternity suit? There has to be some overriding objective that makes the protagonist want to risk it all.
So let's talk about what a log line is actually designed to do.
Well, again, it has to give us a character who has a problem, and both the character and that problem need to be clearly defined in their genre.
Just want to mention before we go on, if anyone has questions, please ask us in the chat line. And also we have people emailing us questions as well.
Right.
Keep them coming. We need to know right away what kind of movie this is going to be.
And so once we know that, the genre, we need to create the hook that makes us care about the outcomes for the characters as they move past obstacles. And if they're not encountering obstacles, you have a problem too. But they have to encounter these obstacles on the way to achieving their goals.
One of the easiest ways to make us care is to give the protagonist some sort of internal flaw to deal with.
There are dozens of great examples of this character technique. Just think of, for example, Don Corleone's refusal to adapt to new ways of doing business in The Godfather, or Mel Gibson's character in Lethal Weapon as he's dealing with PTSD and the death of his wife.
Or Tom Cruise's inability to deal with his guilt over the death of his pal Goose in both Top Gun movies. Great log lines often begin by quickly introducing a flawed protagonist.
Right. Perfectionism doesn't really work. Well, when the protagonist has a difficult personal issue to overcome in order to achieve an obstacle, a worthwhile objective, we're always much more interested in finding out how that personal issue is handled.
So let's get down to the important part. A good protagonist is often a normal person who, because of circumstances outside of their control, is pushed into an unusual or extraordinary situation.
Even better is a unique person, somebody with certain abilities or certain personal demons who's forced into a unique situation.
That kind of sounds like Liam Nielsen's character in every movie since Taken. I have a very particular set of skills. One
Right,
of my
right,
favorite lines.
right. An easy way to resist the temptation to tell too much in a logline is to work with a sort of a template. A straightforward approach would be something like, when something happens, that's the inciting incident, our hero must do something to deal with that incident and overcome something or someone threatening in his way.
It actually is pretty simple. If you have a compelling protagonist who's suddenly faced with an unforeseen and impossible challenge that might be confronted, like if you're a professional assassin and your daughter has been kidnapped by sex traffickers.
There you go. You really like those Liam Neeson movies.
Well, it's just the first movie was a very good script, and that's why it became so popular.
Right. And what's not to like? After all, he's got that set of skills, right? So just to be sure your protagonist has a serious struggle, and then your log line will be much easier to write. When you have stakes in the outcome of that struggle, then we'll always care about what happens.
There are some little secrets that can save you a lot of work, and that makes your logline work a lot better. So let's go through a couple.
Okay, well, the first one is avoid naming your characters in the log line, even your protagonist. I think this is a very personal thing, but I think there are a couple of reasons I say this. Any name you put in your log line may, for reasons completely unknown to you, they could be a complete turnoff to a reader or to the person you're talking to. For example, let's say you name your protagonist Sarah. How do you know the Sarah isn't the name of somebody's mother who just passed away or the name of a despised ex-wife, right? And just naming your heroine Sarah could kill your chances. It's much better to quickly describe your characters with accurate adjectives like, I don't know, devoted and shy, or fiercely independent, or rebellious.
Another tip is to use the active voice in writing your logline. Your characters, after all, need to act and not merely react. So use sentences structures that is in the active present tense.
Right. Kind of avoid those ing words if you can. You should also eliminate any words that are not absolutely essential to the main thrust of your story. For example, saying things like, and then she went, could just as well be written as she goes.
My favorite trick is to work in what I call the opposites, using contrasting elements like a quiet, passive young man becomes the head of a ruthless mafia family.
Let me think who that could have been, like maybe Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Or an insecure male nurse marries into a family led by a suspicious CIA veteran.
Well, that was the perfect setup in Meet the Fockers.
Another good script.
Right.
Or how about the over-the-hill fighter pilot who feels responsible for the death of his student's father?
Hard to believe Maverick was actually over the hill, but that log line pretty well tells the whole story of that major hit movie.
When you describe your character with built-in personal issues, or when you make them a fish out of water, the conflict becomes obvious, and conflict is what storytelling is all about.
The worst thing you can do is try to tell your story beat by beat.
Unless you're a storyteller with the public speaking skills of Mark Twain, you'll lose your listener after the first 30 seconds, and you'll probably regret that.
Right. The more detail you put into your log line and pitch, the more bogged down you're going to be. That's why I think more than 2 or 3 sentences is really too much.
Remember, your only purpose at this point is to engage the listener and get them to want to know more. And that more comes by reading your script.
Which brings up a strategy for everybody to consider. Write the log line before you write the script. If you have your characters in mind and the specifics that go with them, and if you know the inciting incident that sets your characters in action, and you know the fulfilling resolution to all those conflicts, just write it down in 1, 2, or 3 sentences that you can recite in under a minute.
Then recite your log lines to anyone who will listen and watch the reaction, because even friends and family will give you an honest reaction without even knowing it.
Right. Facial expressions, body language, and their tone of voice will tell you immediately whether or not they get it, whether they understand what you're talking about, or if they're just being polite.
The best possible reaction, of course, will be sincere eye contact with them asking, do you have the script? Or then what happens? If you hear anything like that, then you know you have a story worth turning into a screenplay.
Right. So, okay, let's summarize some of this. Maybe we should review the basics.
Sure. So briefly identify the setting, which should imply the genre.
And then quickly identify your protagonists, their shortcomings, what's at stake for them, and what's keeping them from reaching their goals.
Okay, now that you have a log line that convinces somebody to actually read your script, let's move on to and get into the business of selling your script and yourself with a verbal pitch.
Right. This gets scary, but keep this in mind. Buyers are always looking for new writers and new ideas. And most of the people hearing your pitch really don't exactly know what they want in a script.
What everyone wants, of course, is a hit. But if hits were easy to come up with, then everyone would have one. Every movie would be a box office smash. And we don't, and if we don't know that's not the case, we all know that's not the case.
Right. In his book, Adventures in the Screen Trade, which I recommend to everybody, the legendary screenwriter William Goldman addressed this issue with his now famous quote, "Nobody knows anything."
Which is good news for us as writers because that means that anything is possible in terms of what buyers are looking for.
And when a buyer greenlights a movie, it's often a matter of hunches and feelings about actors, directors, and writers and scripts.
So your job is to be a writer whom a buyer feels good about, which means they need to understand how easy you are to work with and that you've got a script that can make a great movie or a TV series.
Look at it this way. If you tell a room full of strangers a story and you can keep their attention while you're telling it, you're not really selling anything. You're just telling a story. And what you're really selling is yourself.
Just tell the story by laying out your character arcs and the overall storyline as an easily understood visual fashion.
Pitching well is more than just going through the plot points of your story. You should be able to tell the listener why you wrote the script and why you came up with this idea in the first place.
Maybe what led you to write the script is something from your own life that changed you, or it's a story you found that has personal meaning to you and to others. Don't be afraid to reveal some emotional connection to the story and the characters.
If you can do that, the listener will quickly realize that you are the person to write this story because you care. The word passion, I know, has been overworked, but it's the right word for what you need to show to your listeners.
Now, aside from this, you must be careful that you don't use the person you're pitching to as your therapist.
Right, right.
Bob and I have
We've seen that.
Bob and I have been in the position, a good position of years ago's hearing pitches and log lines, and sometimes it's too personal, and we become therapists. You need to be very careful about that. So once you've opened your pitch by describing your personal connection to the story you're about to tell them, move on quickly to the hook, which should make the listener lean forward a bit and wonder what's coming next. At that point, you lay down your log line, which is not a dry recitation of the script's best characters or plot points.
Right. One of the best techniques I ever heard from a writer starts with a simple question: what if? And he followed that with a unique concept and a protagonist who's faced with impossible problems. And then the writer solved the problems and he did it all in 3 minutes.
The what if is so mysterious, isn't
Right.
it?
What starts the conversation?
There's a certain performance element to pitching, and you should do your best to get good at it. I have to speak personally. I was petrified the first few times because it's like getting up in front of stage. Even
Right.
there may be only one person there, but so practice is
Right.
a
You
good
see,
thing.
no matter how great your writing is or how amazingly commercial your script or movie idea is, it can all come down to your ability to pitch, which is, as Suzanne implies, it's a performance in front of a live audience.
It will probably be a very small audience, sometimes just one person, and we're talking about not only in person, but oftentimes these days it's done on a Zoom meeting.
Right.
So whom you're meeting with for the very first time, you need to make a good impression, and they may have heard 1,000 pitches before yours, but they're always hoping you have a great story to tell. You just have to be able to grab their attention and tell it well.
Right. Over the years, we've heard a lot of pitches from some really good writers who have never been able to sell a script, usually because they ignore the basics of a good log line and they never worry about how they sound when talking about their project or how to best present their ideas in a pitch meeting.
A lot of writers don't like the idea of pitching, but Everyone can learn this stuff, even if they're naturally shy. The secret in knowing how to prepare for a pitch and in training yourself to talk about the story with calm confidence, which can be just as effective as high energy presentation.
Right. Hopefully you've learned some of the confidence about your story by writing it and rewriting it and getting some actionable feedback by the kind of professionals we work with at the Wiki Screenplay Contest and the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards.
And here's a little secret about pitching. Even the most experienced professionals practice their pitches over and over again, whether it's in front of the bathroom mirror. Don't laugh, that's what people do, or to each and every family member. Professional practice telling their stories over and over until they almost have it memorized word for word.
Yeah, if you can't stand in front of the bathroom mirror and look at yourself pitching, you need to work on that because you're going to be standing in front of other people who will be looking at you. So you have to get over that self-consciousness. And so it all comes down to putting the pieces together first, and then it's about practicing your pitch until it's really almost a part of you.
We could talk about this all day, but we have a lot of questions, and so we need to get to. So I guess we should wrap this up.
Yeah, but first, let's quickly summarize some key points. Okay, I'll start. First, you have to know what's going on in the business, what kind of scripts are being bought and developed.
Finish at least one really good script that becomes a writing sample everyone will want to see at some point.
And then write several killer log lines for that script. These are your calling card. If they're good, these log lines will get you meetings with managers and producers.
And start pitching to everyone you come in contact with. It's great practice and it helps the world to see you're serious about your writing and selling your writing.
And also keep a copy of your log lines, all versions of it, and your script. Keep a copy of your script on your smartphone. You never know when somebody, you meet them in the supermarket line and they say, gee, that sounds interesting, send it to me. Well, be ready to send it.
Also, another great way is to record yourself. You know, we all have cell phones. Record
Right.
yourself, look at yourself pitching, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. Practice your pitch constantly so it's almost an automatic autopilot when the time comes.
Right. And remember, managers, producers, executives, they're people just like you and me, and they need what you have, a great script. Without that script, they don't even have a job. But remember, keep it short. They want to hear your pitch, not your whole story.
After your pitch, wait a week or two, then follow up with an email just to check in and ask if they have any questions for you. Don't be a pest, but keep the lines of communication open, and it never hurts to say thank you.
Right. And then start writing your next script. You know, managers and agents and producers, they're always looking for a working relationship. They're not really interested in one-shot wonders. If you have one script, write two more. That's my suggestion.
Okay, so I see a lot of questions, so let's start
Right.
with Gary.
Okay.
Gary says, I've always heard that my log line should be on the cover of my script, just under the title. Is that what you recommend?
Well, you know, this is a very personal thing, but we read a lot of scripts. And when you have a log line on the cover of your script, what happens is we get a preconceived notion of what the script is about, obviously. And sometimes it's not our cup of tea. If you write a log line about, I don't know, a space adventure that takes place featuring Thomas Jefferson and the US Constitution, I'm not going to want to read that because it sounds a little nuts, frankly, and I don't want to have that prejudice. So I tend to recommend that you do not put your log line on the cover of your script. Make them open the script and read several pages so they get a flavor of it right away. If you've gotten to the point of somebody has your script in hand, you're past the log line point.
Margaret says, is there a maximum word count you recommend for a log line? I don't know if word count, but two or three sentences would
Right,
be
right.
long sentences if you want.
Right, right.
But usually the shorter the better.
Always the shorter the better, right?
Yeah.
So Jason has a great question. He says, what do you think about pitching from written notes or an outline?
We all want to do that.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I have seen both. I personally made it my life goal to not have notes. I had notes in the car, and right before I stepped into the meeting, I took a look at the notes, and then I just winged it. And maybe I was not as good at the beginning, but I got much better. And on the other end, Bob and I have heard pitches in Logline, and we have had writers with their little cards.
Right, where
And
they call it a buck slip, like a little narrow piece of paper with
yeah,
bullet points on it.
yeah,
But God, the one thing you don't want to do is read from a piece of paper when you're
right,
pitching. You want to
right.
make eye contact, have those bullet points memorized before your meeting. If you're just going to read from the piece of paper, you might as well have just sent the paper to them, you know. So Brian's got a kind of a long question here. He says, I pitched to a producer before the strike started, and he wanted me to give him a copy of my notes for what he called a record of our meeting. It
I've
was,
never heard of that.
yeah. He said, Brian says, it was really awkward to say no, so I left my notes behind, and I haven't heard from him since. What do I do now? Well, Brian, the Writers Guild recommends you never leave anything behind unless you're being paid for it. Ideas are as free as the breeze. They're not protectable. The only thing that's protectable is the expression of an idea. I would never leave notes behind to anybody unless I had an option agreement with them, something like that. So what do you do now? I think you call this person, email them, maybe show up at their office, wherever you met with them, and say, I'd like to get my notes back, please, or let's talk about making a deal. But be very careful about leaving your written material behind with people, particularly if they are not Writers Guild signatories.
Right.
So,
So we have a question from Ellen. You mentioned don't use names in a log line. What if your story involves a famous historical person? Is it then okay to mention the name?
oh, well,
Oh,
I
I
think
think
so.
so.
I think so
Yeah.
because that tells us what the genre is, the setting, the time period, that sort of a
And
thing.
actually, that's half your log line because they know
Right,
what that
right.
person
But
is about.
again, don't pitch a log line Thomas Jefferson in a spaceship, things like that. Be very careful about that. That's an offbeat example, but trust me, I've seen those pitches.
So here's one of the number one questions. How can you get an opportunity to pitch?
Wendy, great question.
Mhm.
The opportunity to pitch comes as a result of your hard work. And because writing is the fun part of this career. The hard part is reaching out to people, the networking, the meeting people.
But you start with an agent or a
if
manager.
if you can get a manager or an agent, or if you have friends in the business, or even people who know people who know people, get those meetings. The opportunity comes from having a great log line and getting somebody to hear that log line. You can even be on the telephone. You can call somebody up and say, I've got a great idea for a story. Would you like to quickly hear it? And just then recite your log line. If that's of interest to somebody, then they'll say, why don't you come in and let's meet?
But Wendy said, how do you get the opportunity? In many ways, but you have to get a meeting, whether it's on Zoom or in person.
Right.
Generally speaking, you pretty much start with a manager and agent, and then they will try and get you that
Right.
meeting.
And also, I think doing well in a reputable online screenplay contest,
Mhm.
like the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards or the Wiki Screenplay Contest, doing well in those gives you something to talk about when you call somebody. Hey, I just won this big contest, or I've placed as a finalist. I've got a great script. I'd like to come in and talk to you about it. Everybody's open to great ideas because everybody needs them.
Okay, Phil says or asks, should you give a short bio when starting the pitch?
Well, I think that's generally in a meet and greet meeting. When you're meeting somebody in person, say, hi, my name is Phil. I've been writing for so long and I've got how many scripts. And by the way, I noticed that you have a golf trophy on your shelf. I love golf, something like that. Look for some affinity with the person you're pitching to. And that generally gets the ball rolling. For example, I once got a great job because I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt when I walked
Well,
into
I
the
don't think
meeting.
that was the only reason.
And guess what? The guy I was pitching to was also wearing a Hawaiian shirt. So suddenly we had something in common. We're both California guys who hate to get dressed up. And so we started a conversation basically about the coconut buttons on our Hawaiian shirts. Long story short, a week later, I had a major job. So it's a lot of about,
And you're a good writer.
but pitching can really evolve into relationships, and that's what you're really after. You're trying to meet somebody and become their friend and that sort of thing. So,
It is a social process as well, for sure.
right. Oh, here's a good one from Amanda, and we only have time for a couple more here. I've been pitching a project to independent producers, And the meetings are always a little nerve-wracking because they always interrupt me in the middle of what I'm saying. Is that normal?
Oh, yes. We forgot to mention that you need people to interrupt you when you're
Right.
practicing.
Right, right.
Like if you're a dad or a mom and the kids are in the background, that's good training. Sometimes they do that. And
But
then,
I think you can expect it, you know.
yeah, and sometimes they interrupt you telling you, that's a great idea. Tell me more, tell me more. And you're like,
That's fine. That's fine. But you know, if they're interrupting you with, excuse me, I have to take this call, that means there's something wrong with your pitch. You're losing your audience, you know. They aren't really fully engaged. And that, again, the trick for that is maintain eye contact. Don't be looking at your notes during a pitch.
so Elizabeth says, at what point should you register your screenplay with the WGA?
Oh, good question.
Anytime,
Anytime.
as soon as possible, if
Yeah.
you'd like.
Understand that registering for the WGA is a great protection. It establishes your rights in the script, but it doesn't keep somebody from writing another script just like yours. You know, as I said, your ideas are not protectable, only the expression of it. The one thing I do want to mention is we've learned that putting your WGA registration number on the cover of your script, it's kind of a no-no. It turns people off. It makes you look like somebody who's fairly litigious, like, oh my gosh, they're going to claim I stole their story. I'm not even going to read this thing. Everybody understands that there are a lot of great ideas out there. Nobody's really looking to steal your idea. So I think having your registration is a fine thing. Keep it in your desk drawer, but don't broadcast it. Don't put copyright notices on the copy of your script either.
Yvonne says, I hear different suggestions whether to reveal the end or not in a pitch. Thank you for your suggestion.
Well, I think if you're at the point of actually pitching, if you're beyond the log line point, they're going to want to know what's the resolution of the protagonist's journey. You know, does the protagonist survive all these travails or not? You know, I don't think there's anything wrong as long as you have a compelling ending, maybe a twist, maybe a great surprise, or certainly something that's satisfying to the audience. I mean, Suzanne's a huge fan of the Hollywood ending, the happy ending, you know, and there's nothing wrong with indicating that it's a happy ending.
Right.
And we want to feel good about having spent our time watching your movie, frankly.
Yeah. And we have one from Jose. Can anyone living outside of the US reach the right people and having them read his script?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly in today's world, I think where communication is so facile. I mean, you can get somebody on a phone call, on a Zoom call, that kind of a thing.
Again, having an agent or a manager would be very helpful.
Sure.
Because they would probably be in LA or New York, and they have access to these people.
But the film business is increasingly international. We see a lot of great scripts coming out of Mexico. We had one from Brazil the other day. We always deal with writers from the UK. Even I think we had 2 from the Ukraine last month. So great writers are everywhere, and everybody's looking for your material, particularly, you know, if you look at what's on the streamers right now, an awful lot of international productions, a lot of stuff coming out of Asia, a lot of stuff coming out of Germany. So living outside the US is no excuse, frankly.
Now, if you want to actually work on a television show on a daily basis, then you need to be in town.
That's a little tougher. That's a little tougher for sure. Sure. So gosh, we have a lot of questions here.
From Linda. Should the log line for TV series just cover the pilot or the entire arc of the series? Well, you would be good at answering that.
Yes, Linda, I think your log line only needs to deal with the pilot script. You want to intrigue them. You want to get them to want to know more. You want to get them to the point where they say, great, would you write a Bible for us? Tell us what the next 24 episodes are going to be, that sort of a thing. So I think just focus on that initial pilot story when you're pitching your log line.
And here is a question from Jim. It's a tough question. Where can you get qualified? Where can you get a qualified person to tell you not to quit your day job because you don't have what it takes? Thanks, Jim.
Well, that's brutal, Jim. But I must.
But he has a good point.
Absolutely, I must tell you something. There are so many screenplay contests online right now. 99% of them are in the business of giving you flattery, false hope, and what I call attaboys. At the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards and the Wiki, we pride ourselves in giving you a real professional perspective. If your script stinks for any particular reason, we're going to tell you. If your writing needs vast improvement, we're going to tell you that too. We've had writers write a dozen scripts and they never get better because they're not really accepting the notes and the feedback we're giving them. This is a collaborative process, being a screenwriter or a television writer. You have to be willing to make changes based upon the opinion of other professionals. So
also, I really think it's up to the individual. It's up to you, Jim, to decide if you want to go on, because it is sometimes a long process.
right.
And the more you write, the better you get. So it's really a very personal thing. I know people, how long did it take you to break into the business?
I'm embarrassed. And I was an English major. I thought I knew how to write. It took me 10 years to sell my first script, but I never stopped trying. I never stopped writing. And I never stopped improving my skills.
It took me about that long too. And the good part is there are a lot more TV shows.
Right.
So they're looking for a lot more writers. So it just depends on your individual situation. Maybe you can't wait 10 years.
Right.
Maybe you have the type of other job that takes up a lot of your time. It just depends. Or if you're a single young guy with no responsibilities, then you have more time. But it's a very individual.
But yeah, during my 10 years of trying to do this, I never quit my day job. I just would go home at night after work and I would write until I fell asleep.
And you also went to law school.
I did a lot of
things. In
things.
case you want to be a lawyer.
I had a lot of fallbacks.
Yeah, real estate school. I mean, we've done it all.
Right.
So it's just up to you, Jim.
Right.
And how about, did we do?
Oreos here? How many sentences should my log line contain? Maximum. I think more than 5, you're in deep water. I like to see a log line that's 2 or 3 sentences max. Again, less is always more.
Right. Let's take a few more questions.
All right.
Let's see here. What about using Slated to pitch?
Well, Slated is an online platform that tries to put you together with financing. It's okay. You know, I don't have that much experience with it. I'm a member of it. I see a lot of scripts come through there. They're asking for a piece of your action. So I'd be very careful about that.
Josie, or is it Jose?
Jose,
I'm sorry. I have my script as finalist at Wiki. Congratulations. That's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
I live outside the US. What can I do next?
Jose, we saw your script actually, and I think
you remember this.
Yeah, you were a finalist, and you're even on Writer Showcase now on the website. What you should do now is take that kind of win. Being a finalist is not a small thing, and let the world know. Start using social media to announce to everybody, hey, I'm a finalist at the Wiki. Here's my log line. I'd like to send this to you. We have a list of what we call the Hot 100 managers and agents looking for new writers. If you send me an email, I'll send that to you. But it's now it's at the point where the writing is done. You now need to start the sales process, and you also need to keep working on that next script. Again,
that's important.
Having one script is not going to be enough. I don't care how good the script is.
Yeah. And also you can, if you haven't already, create your very own website. And you can put your background, what kind of writer you are, maybe put a clip of your script on there. Tell people you're looking for representation. You just need to really be out there.
Right.
And go to film festivals. They have them all over the world. Contacts is very important. Meet writers. You can meet actors there. You just need to really work hard at getting yourself out there as well as your script.
It's that word that makes the hair on the back of writers' neck stand up, networking. I just want to say again, thanks for showing up today. My closing remark is, if you really want to know what it's all about, take a look at my book, The Hollywood Screenwriter, and it will give you kind of the insider's view of what the career is like and the kinds of things you need to do.
And my closing remarks is never give up. Keep working. We plan on having a number of free webinars in the next few months. So stay tuned and look out for those. And we really appreciate your time because time is valuable for
Right.
everyone. And we'll see you at the next webinar. And I guess, or hope we'll see you at the movies.